I'd like to thank you all for coming out. It's great to live in a town that where people come out for books. So thanks for coming out, and thanks to the library for hosting this event. If only because it gives me a chance to hang out with Mohsin. We've known each other for 25 years, which is a long time, considering that neither one of us is a day over 30. I find that shocking. So anyway, thanks so much. We're going to have a conversation, which we're going to perform for you, I guess, and then we're all going to have a conversation. There'll be a chance for all of you to ask questions. There'll be microphones going around the room and stuff. Mohsin, great book. You don't write at a fast clip. I've been waiting for years.
So have I, Dave. No. I think it has to do with writing novels decreasingly badly over time. And so the first draft that I write, as you know, I think early on seen some of my early drafts, it's really pretty terrible, and then it slowly gets to be less terrible, and a little bit better, and a little bit better. And so, 7 years for the first 2 books each, and 6 years for this one. Douglas Adams says that, in The Hitchhiker's Guide for the Galaxy, that the secret to flying is throwing yourself at the ground and missing. And that's sort of my approach to drafts and novels, which is that the first few times I throw, first few years on each book, I throw myself at the ground and hit pretty hard. But eventually, something falls into place formally, structurally, voice-wise, etc., and it begins to work after being a disaster for a few years.
So you basically, when you say drafts, I mean, for me, I just have an idea before I sit down about the structure, style, and so on, but you actually write a whole draft, and then you'll chuck the whole draft. You'll start over, right?
Yeah, I have been starting over.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it is a little crazy, actually. If the idea worked, I wouldn't do this. but it's sort of like there's an idea you want to get married, and so you meet somebody, you think, okay, well, the idea is going to work here, and it doesn't work at all, and then you meet somebody else, and for me it's a bit like that. That the first draft of this book, I thought I want to write a big novel that looks at different aspects of society in Pakistan: young, old, rich, poor, village, city, slum, villa. And I thought the way to do this is to write a series of chapters, each in different person's voice, and collectively assemble this collage, which would be this novel. And and I loved that idea, and I worked at it until I realized it was just not working at all. And I think I salvaged 2 short stories out of it that I was able to get published, but basically it was a year or 2 down the tubes. And so it's. I think we work the same way. The difference is that your idea often works, and mine
Well,
and mine doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's debatable. But so James Wood says the house of fiction has many windows, but it only has 3 doors: first person, second person, and third person. Why did you pick the smallest door? Second person is arguably a boutique door. Right. I mean, the third person door is ample.
Yeah.
The first person door is solid. Second person is, why a second person?
It's like a slot that you let your cat into.
It's
the
like a
house.
hobbit door.
Yeah.
It's round, it's
But
pretty.
the thing about it is, interestingly, the second person door, I think, in writing this novel, it's the first novel I've written entirely in the second person, although the second person is cropped up in permutations in the earlier books, sort of the trial scenes in Maud Smoke, and there's a you address, dramatic monologue in Reluctant Fundamentalist, but they're not second person, either of those books. This one is. Partly it had to do with once I figured out that I wanted it to be in a self-help structure, it felt that you was a natural form of address for a self-help book. Partly it was because, I in all of my novels, I want to make the relationship between the reader and writer explicit. And having a you that invites the reader to be a character or to play a role overtly and to be aware of the fact that we're doing this. They do that in every novel, but to be aware of this dance, the U was tempting for that reason. And partly because once I started writing, I realized that what looks like a small door actually is a fantastic machine. You know, the second person, it only, it seems constraining. It seemed constraining to me until I started writing a novel in it. And what I realized suddenly in the second person was, you know, and apologies to sort of James Woods, but is that you could have, you know, that you basically wound up with sort of a house on stilts where like the entire ground floor is a door, in the sense that you could, in second person, you can write this character that I've read to you from in an intimate, almost first-person perspective. You becomes like an I, and so you're inside the head of somebody. It feels very close. Often when we talk about ourselves, we use you to describe ourselves. And so you is almost a verbal crutch for I in casual conversation. So you can slip into a first-person perspective inside somebody's head, close to their skin, very first person. And then you can move into third person also. So you is this character, but sitting next to him is his friend, the Ojibwe novelist David Treuer. And David Treuer right now is thinking, you know, when is my friend going to shut up and let me answer the next question? And so you slip into like a third person point of view, where you're actually, you know, associating, you're beyond, you're into this third-person perspective. And in terms of you can also zip back because the you has a natural symmetry or you know, evocation of the sort of cosmic thou that like so much of monotheistic and theistic writing takes place in, as though there is this, you know, this thou form, thou shalt not, you know, eat pig or whatever. And so, you know, it becomes, so in a way you can zoom into this kind of cosmic perspective. So what I liked about it was really freeing. I've never done a proper third-person novel, and you can make a lot of these moves in third person, obviously. Yeah. But in addition to the third-person moves, you have the direct address to the reader, which is made possible by second person. So in some senses, I feel that second person allows you to do first, allows you to do third, and it allows you to do some other stuff on top. So it's like the, you know, like the value meal.
But it's not a value meal you can eat all the time.
No,
You can't.
no.
You can't.
No.
And you know, so now I can't.
Yes.
So because you did, it's really frustrating.
You have to wait at least one novel, and then yeah.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you what I like about it, and I can tell you all, for those of you who haven't read it yet, what I like about it. This is also something I like about the Reluctant Fundamentalist a lot. Each in their own way, in different ways, force readers to assume a perspective that they might not otherwise assume. So in the Reluctant Fundamentalist, especially for you know, Western readers, but that's a large category, but especially for Western readers, it's a conversation where you only hear one, it's two people conversing, but you only hear one half of it from the point of view of a Pakistani man. You don't hear what the American has to say, and I have to say, you know, for the 3 or 4 hours it takes to read that book, for a lot of Western readers, it'll be the first 3 or 4 hours they spend inside the head of someone from Pakistan. It forces a different perspective on especially world events like 9/11, which I think is invaluable. It's really amazing. Similarly, the second person in How to Get Filthy Rich in Rising Asia forces a perspective on lots of readers, Western and not, a perspective of being of the underclass, of being very poor, and trying to make their way in the world. And you sort of assume that subject position by virtue of the voice, and it's really smart. I really love it, and it's really political. And so, I had a question. I was thinking about this the whole time I was reading the book.
Keep going. I love where you're going with this. This is fantastic.
And I was thinking about this, that Moth Smoke you wrote when you were in Cambridge, right, mostly. Some as an undergraduate, some at Cambridge.
Cambridge, Mass, yeah.
Yeah, Mass. And The Reluctant Fundamentalist you wrote mostly when you were in England. And this is the first book you've written while you've been living in Pakistan.
Yeah, mostly, yeah.
And yet, it's an unnamed country. So Did living in Pakistan affect the writing of this book? I mean, directly or indirectly? I mean, it always does. I mean, home is, nostos. I mean, the call for home is huge in every single one of your books. But I was wondering what it was like finally writing back home, if it changed it at all.
It's kind of weird, when Malt Smoke is a novel about Pakistan written largely in America, and Reluctant Fundamentalist is a novel significantly about America.
Written in England.
Written in England.
Yeah.
And this one is a novel about a nameless place written in Pakistan, and the nameless place is a lot like Pakistan.
Yeah.
In fact, is quite similar. um, and Originally, the reason to write it without using names, it began because I was thinking, how am I going to write about Pakistan? I moved back to Pakistan, so in theory, I should have now had my own point of view on the place. But I realized that so much of what I thought about Pakistan was stuff that I had been told by other people, that I'd read and seen in newspapers, that I'd picked up generally. Pakistan is like shorthand now for many people for terrorism and this and that and the other. Islam is means certain things to people. Even names, Umar, Osama, they're not just names anymore. They seem to have this whole thing. And I came to think that in a way, Pakistan had been branded. It was this branded thing. And it was like an iPhone, And so if you want to describe an iPhone, if you start using brand names, you can't describe it at all. I have an iPhone 5, it runs iOS 6, it has the following apps. I can call a car using Uber. What is that? It's like, it becomes totally, you start saying the same thing as everybody else about the thing. And to describe it for yourself, you have to sort of just take the brands out of it and say, okay, I have this block of glass and metal and plastic. I hold it to my ear. It allows me to speak to people in the distance, as other blocks of plastic and glass do as well. But in addition, I can touch it, and if I touch it, I can open up some programs, and these programs allow me to access the internet, which I can otherwise do, but I can access it in a different way, or they slightly simplify the way in which I can call a taxi, or they allow me to see if the person in the bar next to me is single, or whatever the things. And then you begin to talk about what the thing is.
Yeah.
And so, and I like it because, so I thought if I strip the brand names from Pakistan, I could talk about it for myself and not say, oh, this is what a mosque is, or this is what Islam is, this is what Pakistan is. It would just be, here are people, this is what they do, here's what they say, this is what life feels like. Yeah. So it was a way for me to talk about it for myself, which I didn't know how to do. I thought, so much of what I'm going to say is so regurgitated. So that the namelessness started there. But when I began to do it, I started liking, like the second person, I started liking it, which is why this draft wasn't thrown away like the other drafts. I started liking it because I found that, there were some really appealing things, in particular, two things. One is that when it comes to names, in the absence of names, readers have to supply some degree of meaning to these things. So if you have, my parents are Naved and Naseem, if I named his parents Naved and Naseem, people would hear those names and they would associate them with two names probably quite different from names that they're familiar with or that their parents don't have. If they're Pakistani, Naved isn't that common a name anyway. And if they're American, even less so. But if you say mother and father, and the character is you, the words mother and father bring with them the connotations of you're the reader's mother and you're the reader's father. And in a way that names might not. So the namelessness was a way for readers to begin to insert their own relationships into the book. And the other thing, the second thing that I liked once I began to do it was I started to feel that maybe there was a kind of, instead of looking at the peculiarities of Pakistan, here's what makes Pakistan this freakishly weird place, it was, here's some of the universalities of the place. That this could be Caracas or Mexico City or Sao Paulo or Lagos or Johannesburg or, Bangkok. And I started to think, well, why can't Lahore, the city where I live, equally be a template for the world city as New York or other cities that are normally used as like the template for the global megacity? And I really like that possibility.
Huh. it's funny. This, I was talking about, I think I was talking about the Reluctant Fundamentalist recently with somebody, and I said, "Have you been to Pakistan?" And speaking, I don't remember who I was talking to, and they said, "No, I've never been to the Middle East." And I said, "Well, it's it's pretty far from the Middle East.
It's east.
It's
Yeah.
it's east." And so, Rising Asia is really interesting. I think in some ways, if you said Pakistan, people would make the mistake of this person I was talking to, and sort of shove it at least ideologically or at least imaginatively much further west than it is. So I thought that was really a cool move. When Mohsin and I were in college, we would spend many hours. It was kind of a contest, like who could be more nostalgic than the other. We'd be laying around, and I'd say, "Well, if I were home right now," and I'd say, "I'd be doing this," and I'd go on a long story about what we would be doing back home, my cousins and my brothers and my sister and parents and whatnot. And then Mohsin, "Well, if I was in Lahore, this is what we would be doing." And so we spent so many hours indulging in nostalgia, and it made the pain of being away from home a lot. It lessened that pain. Our friendship and sort of this nostalgia contest. I think, for the record, I won. But
Well, it's pretty hard to compete with a Native American on the subject of nostalgia.
nostalgia, no, we kind of own it in a way. Nostalgic for a past that never was. But and here we're going to veer out of the writing a little bit. But I'm wondering, all this nostalgia which I experienced secondhand, or firsthand, secondhand. And now you're back in Pakistan. How has it changed since you were a kid? You're finally back in the cradle.
Yeah, it's strange. I've changed, obviously, and so it's a little difficult to separate out how much the place has changed and how much I've changed. It's become, Lahore has become a much bigger city. When I was born, it was 1 million people. Now it's 10 million people.
Wow.
And all around my grandfather's house, where we grew up, are like high-rise buildings are now being built. And there's a shopping mall where our neighbors used to be. And my wife has a delicatessen in that shopping mall, as a matter of fact. And there's more pollution, and the electricity used to go then, but it goes more now. The water pressure was bad then, but it's worse now. On the other hand, there are a lot more restaurants. The university scene is much more vibrant than it was when I was younger. The live music scene is much more interesting. There are many more young writers, and there's a literature festival which had 25,000 people. We never had that when I was growing up, 3 weekends ago. So it's different. It is, and again, as you say, the past that we think that we had probably never existed.
Yeah.
But even that said, Lahore does feel different. It has become a mega city, and it's like for me, it's still partly just an old town, and it is an old town, but it's an old town of 10 million people, and it's intensified on so many levels. The pace has gone up, violence has gone up, pollution has gone up, wealth has gone up. And I guess the biggest thing is that it's changing so fast. Los Angeles is changing, but it isn't changing at that rate. And I think people get anxious when change happens too quickly. And Lahore didn't feel like an anxious city to me growing up, but it feels anxious to me as a 40-something now. It feels like there's a lot of anxiety, and maybe even a certain amount of depression. I think there is a degree of sort of profound depression. Pakistan has been through tough times, and so there's a degree of just mental health issues and depression that is much more than when I was younger.
It seems like a lot of that found its way into the book. In that, the way to get filthy rich in Rising Asia, according to the narrator of this book, is to go into the water business. and you commented on I think on NPR recently about how what we used to take for granted as being free and readily available, things like water or air, are becoming commodified, and the resources which are increasingly scarce, especially in places like Pakistan. But in the United States, this is hitting the Midwest too, with the massive droughts that they've experienced. Water is becoming really, really precious. Not the case in Minnesota yet. It's still the land of 10,000 lakes. So at least we have that going for us, at least in my homeland. But you described this process of deruralization and rapid urbanization, and your narrator hits on, or the protagonist hits on water as a way to get rich. Does that seem like a real? Is that drawn from life?
I think water to me is I really feel that it's going to go. Things are going to go pretty crazy with water in the coming generation. So in Karachi for quite some time now, people who are well off, upper middle class families, have been buying water that comes in tankers and refills their house water tanks because the municipal supply is basically completely gone. And Lahore, I don't know people who buy tanker water yet, but the water supply in the mains has gotten very, very weak. So you have these illegal donkey pumps that suck the water out of the mains, and then people further down don't get water. And then you pump the water up to your rooftop, it comes down. But that water also is completely contaminated. It's full of feces and heavy metals and cadmium, runoff from pesticides and industrial processes, and it's bad. Anecdotally, there's like a cancer epidemic in Pakistan. Every family I know, people have cancer.
Yeah, we're in the same boat.
Yeah, and I think that it's got to be this huge environmental degradation, and everything we're eating and drinking, every fruit that you have, every tomato that you eat, every piece of vegetable, it's watered with this sludge that we call water. So that's all happening. And then separately, people are trying to get drinking water. So a lot of people buy these big water multi-gallon bottles that they put in their kitchens, and they pour that water. Other people boil water. Some people filter it. But increasingly, water is getting expensive, and it's getting in short supply. And a lot of the water is coming by sticking tube wells into the ground, into the aquifer. They're pumping it out of the ground. Well, the aquifer doesn't replenish very much. So it was maybe 20 years ago, you could go 30 feet into the ground and you got water. Now you go 300 feet into the ground, you get water. And what does that mean? It means that the aquifer is collapsing, and at a certain point, it's gone.
Yeah.
And then what do you do?
Well, what happens next?
Yeah. So for these billions of people in India and China and Pakistan and these countries, Asia, for half of humanity, this is the predicament where water is being used more rapidly than it is being replenished. And so in the new uber capitalist Asia that exists, where everything can be bought and sold, and the state basically stepped back and said, go ahead and make a killing, folks. Water is a real business opportunity, and as is the case anywhere. Like if you look in the United States, the biggest profits are always made from bending the law. So you have sort of the financial crisis in America, where who knows what the hell happened, but effectively a bunch of state underwritten institutions called banks or financial institutions made massive bets with public money or public guarantee, took all the profits, and then when the bets went bad, didn't have to pay any of the losses. They scammed the system. And in the same way, in Pakistan, that's going on from the level of the very, very small entrepreneur all the way to the top. So our hero in this book, figures out that, well, there's a market for mineral water, and there's also tap water. If you boil some tap water and put it into a mineral water bottle and buy a machine that caps the mineral water bottles, you can make a tidy profit. And so he finds a niche, which is what the market is all about, and bends the rules. And so I think it's an entirely legitimate business, and there's so many fakes of every kind in Pakistan and throughout Asia. Whether you're in China or Pakistan or India, you buy an antibiotic, you never know. Hopefully it'll be an antibiotic, but it could be, you know, horse tranquilizer or paracetamol or anything.
So I want to get back to talking about books because, again, you know, as I sort of head back down memory lane, you know, we would talk about, you know, likes and dislikes and books we loved. And I remember you and I were both at various times on Dachi and Ishiguro, particularly for you,
Yeah.
Kicks. And his big book that only 5 people in the world read, The Unconsoled, which should be read by everybody because it's amazing. Did you, The Unconsoled?
I haven't read
See?
Unconsoled.
Right? But nameless narrator.
I would make it 6.
Narrator has a name, but it's sort of a nameless town.
Yeah.
But anyway. But so I remember you like those guys a lot, but in this book, I felt like I'm always looking for how books are related to other books. I felt, in the love story, I felt Marquez, you know, sort of being channeled a little bit. I don't know if that was just my imagination or if you thought of Love in the Time of Cholera.
Yeah, I mean, I thought of Love in Time of Cholera in a couple of ways. One was because it was, you know, a love story sort of really consummated in old age,
Right.
which I liked as a notion for this book. And the other was it had a really nice long title, which was very reassuring, because I was a bit scared that, you know, how are they going to fit this thing onto the spine of a book?
Well, you did really well, because I would just recommend that for the budding writers among you that you don't publish a novel with a title that people can't pronounce, which is what I've done. But so I can pronounce all those words.
Yes,
and that's
it's very helpful. Although tweeting them is extremely difficult. You're left with like 8 characters. My book, and then just the title.
HTGFRI. Yeah, that's tough.
Is good,
Yeah.
GUD. But you know, it's so yeah, Marquez for sure, and also because of the sprawl, you know, of a Marquez novel,
Yeah.
it just takes you sort of the whole world. I love that. But I'm also really interested in compression, as you know, just like writing small books, and so you know, Marquez generally speaking isn't too pushed about compression, but you know, but Calvino and Camus and Borges, Fitzgerald, you know, there are plenty of mid 20th century writers who were compression masters, and and who I've, you know, certainly the sort of modernist tradition is something that I feel very much a part of, or related to, or,
Yeah.
or a student of, I should say, you know, a shameless imitator of. And then, you know, I guess you could say there's a tradition of novels that that refuse to believe that social realism and unreal experimentalism are 2 separate camps. Like
Yeah.
I like to believe that those 2 things can be in one book. In fact, in all of my books, there is a little bit of that.
Yeah, that's one thing. Again, if I may directly address all of you, that on one hand, you know, writing from the subcontinent was for many years defined by basically by Salman Rushdie. So and a tradition that devolved from that he existed in of magical realism on one hand. You know, fatidic dates and coincidences and sort of magic and so on and so forth. Which, and you're shaking your head because that was
No, yeah.
because that was like something that you didn't want to do.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, there's a tradition of writing from the subcontinent, which is almost, well, obscenely lyrical. You know, it's just damn pretty. There's a certain kind of American Indian writing which is in the same vein, and yours kind of slides right in between the two. And I guess I wanted to address you because I really admire it for sort of you have these very slender, you know, bantam, you know, at weigh-ins, weighed in at bantamweight.
Flyweights.
Flyweights.
Yeah.
I mean, very short novels, but condensed. You know, very very thick in their way, but they don't weigh as much as a Rushdie novel, but they do a really important kind of work. And I guess it's not really a question. It's just more of a praise, I guess. I always love writing that does battle with the received ways of thinking. and there are certain easy ways or ways of thinking that Rushdie novels or the very lyrical kind, on the other hand, facilitated. But it was to me in some ways an easy kind of thinking, and it seems to me that your books are pushing harder.
It's like, in a way, I sort of felt that the great 19th century novels, these big novels that took a big swath of society. I wanted this to be sort of one of those, just really small, and partly it was because I'm not sure we have 19th century time anymore.
Yeah.
So if you're going to take 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 800 pages, it better be damn good. As for me as a reader, I read slowly, and I read stuff that length. It's not that I don't, but I'm very picky. I'll read Underworld and love it, but I don't want to read something which is 800 pages and should have been 300 or 400, and so partly I guess it's just chickening out writing small books, and nobody says that's about me, but partly it's because I feel that among the many ways in which literary fiction can intimidate people is scale. So if you don't want to compromise on your sentences, and you don't want to compromise on the themes you're trying to orchestrate, and you don't want to compromise on the formal mechanisms you're setting into motion, to me, small books are less scary. So I imagine, for example, a Pakistani college student who's never read a novel before, and many of my readers are that, type of person. And I want to write a book that they would read. And so, sort of a gateway drug to literary fiction, in a way. And so the small book becomes important, for that activity. And I find them, I like small books. I find them pretty. I think it's whatever your aesthetic inclination is. Some people just like big books. Some people like small books. I like small books, but I guess I like to spend lots of time just sort of honing and chiseling and trying to make the thing, it's also, I suppose, one other part of it is that so much of the American canon, the short story is different, but in the American novelistic canon, there's this notion of big being good. There's like the whiteness of the whale. It's like, Moby Dick and whatnot. And the great American novel, it sounds huge if you just say it. And but in Pakistan, where the literary tradition really is a poetic tradition, and only recently has the novel kind of come into any serious contention, but for 1,000 years until very, very recently, my lifetime, people in a pre-literate society, people sing poetry. And so poetry is the form everybody knows and everybody cares about. And poetry is a compressed form for the most part. You have epic poems, but in the most part, poetry is a small form, and miniature painting is a small form. And so a lot of the culture over there doesn't privilege size. Not that size is bad or less than small. It's not that bigger is worth less than smaller, but also that smaller isn't worth less than big. Whereas I think in America, the idea that big is better is more prevalent, whereas I just don't think it's prevalent at all in Pakistan.
Huh.
Maybe now it is when it comes to cars, but it used to. It wasn't growing up.
Yeah, you're making me rethink, the finishing touches I'm putting on my 500-page masterpiece.
What's the thing? Is it
I can make it. I can do it in 50.
Yes, you go.
I'm sure.
That's right. But the thing about it is that you know how it works. It's basically you have an ambition, and there's a certain amount of space you need to do that ambition. And if that space is 500 pages or 1,000 pages, that's what it is. But then you have to have 500 pages of ambition for that, And I sort of feel like I've got maybe 220 on the outside. It's like max ambition.
I keep hoping you'll do it. Like when you said
I'm going to combine all 3 books into like this one book.
Oh, you should. Because I was thinking, when you're talking about the first draft of Filthy Rich, I'm like, I've always wanted you to do that. I've always wanted you to do
sprawling.
a great, big, mystery-esque,
Yeah.
a
Maybe I just can't do it. I've tried.
You can do it.
I've tried.
I know you can.
Okay.
A big Dickens of a thing. Like I'm sure it can happen.
Yeah.
I have faith in you.
I know. I don't know.
I just think that
It's hard. Those are tough books to write. I like these little easy ones.
Yeah. easy but misleading, right? I mean, I don't want to spoil the book, but I mean, your main character goes through a number of transformations, and not all of them are onwards and upwards. And so there's a paradox, or there's a surprise, I guess. I don't really know how to talk about it without spoiling the book.
Yeah.
Um, but it's not exactly self-help.
Well, it's a different kind of self-help. I think it is self-help, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, partly I think, I think novels are self-help for us. Why do we do this? Why do we sit in a room by ourselves doing
Yeah, why
this
do
thing? Yeah.
For the glory.
Yes, and the money.
Right. Woo. The riches.
Yeah, for the cribs. No, but it's there is some kind of self-help going on. There's a sort of wounded human being who writes novels, and not us, but
No, we're fine.
the other people.
Yeah. The other poor saps who were,
those
we're good. We're in
wounded
good shape.
fools. So there is some degree of self-help going on, but in this book in particular, it is intended as a self-help book. Maybe not how to get filthy rich, although it of course will tell you that if you want, or tell you one way of doing it. But a different kind of self-help book, because what I wanted to do was, well, in part, so much of the language of I should turn and look over here a little bit as well. So much of the language of the market, has pervaded language. We speak of things in terms of brand and in terms of optimizing and monetizing and actualizing and marketing, and it's become pervasive in just human language. What's your intended audience, and how are you going to promote this? And I mean, I can't imagine anybody talked to literary novelists about this stuff 100 years ago. Maybe they did, but anyway, so we're in this completely marketized world, and our language is marketized. And so I wanted to use that marketized language of specifically how to get rich, the different things, how you make a living, how you brand yourself, how you train yourself, how you recruit people, how you deploy people, how you use your assets, how you finance, how you leverage, all that stuff. Use that vocabulary, that language, but sort of subvert it, because I think that the market narrative is an incomplete narrative, because the market narrative is only a growth narrative. It's just a story of how you get more money, how you get more cars, bigger house, bigger pension fund, etc., bigger book advance. It's all about growth, and but human existence and life is equally about loss. It's about getting older, losing your strength, losing your loved ones, and losing your life. And those two stories are both part of the growth, and loss are both part of the human, story, and they precisely cancel out by the end. But I don't think that the language of the market gives us anything to dealing with loss. Anxiety about loss is a market need to be monetized, as far as the market is concerned. Mm-hmm. It's not how do you make somebody less anxious. It's getting old. Here's some Botox, hair transplant, boob job, you'll be sorted. Here's some medication. But that language of loss has been something that has been expressed through, folk culture, religion, family. Those are the things that give us a vocabulary for addressing that stuff. But in this great urbanization which is going on, and this great change, that stuff is being undermined. So families are being disconnected by the move to the city. Folk culture is being forgotten as new stuff comes in, and the new marketing vocabulary replaces all the old stories we used to tell each other. And religion, I see it in Pakistan, but I think it's happening all over the world, is in danger of becoming so politicized that it focuses only on who's in and who's outside of our religious group as a sort of ethnic or almost racial category, Islam, Christianity, Protestant, Catholic, Hindu, Buddhist, that it isn't talking as much or effectively about mortality and loss and equipping us for that kind of stuff. And so we don't have the loss narrative anymore. And because we don't have the lost narrative anymore, what results is anxiety, because we are going to lose. We don't have words for it. We've lost our equipment for dealing with it. And so in a place like Pakistan, I think what I see, and I think I see it in America and many other places too, is mass anxiety, mass mental illness, and mass depression. You know, when the American teenager goes into his high school and shoots dead 20 of his fellow students, and when a Pakistani teenager puts on a vest and detonates and kills 20 people in a bazaar, to me those two things are very similar. It's a suicidal impulse, married to a desire for a grand narrative, something that you did that was great, that would make you, immortal, huge. But they're both born out of, a huge unaddressed state of depression and mental illness.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I guess, what it comes back to is the starting point, which is that designing a self-help book that aims to do one thing creates a shadow, which is the need to maybe have some self-help on the other side. And I think the more earnest engagement in this novel is with that shadow self-help story as opposed to the ostensible self-help story.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I liked about. And again, I don't want to give away the end, but I read the protagonist as getting rich, just not in the ways that we usually think of as wealthy. He ends up wealthy in something else.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
By the end, yeah.
By the end. So that's encouraging.
Yes. I wanted there to be some hope, by the way.
There is. I mean,
Yeah.
there is. There
Yeah.
really is. I'm not just saying. I'm not just saying that so you buy the book, but you have to buy the book to find out exactly
Like,
how that
It is
hope
so
is
worth
inflected.
buying this book for the hope at the end. I just put that out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to be overly market-oriented on this, but you must buy at least 2 copies.
2 copies. 2 copies, you get double the hope.
Yes.
It's true.
Lots of hope on sale here.
We're gonna open it up. We're gonna open it up to and if anyone can market hope, it's Mohsin.
That's right. I sell hope like water.
So with that said, we're gonna open it up to the audience for questions, and then the microphones will go around, and I can't see who's got their hand up. So whoever has the microphones, could you find who's?
Hi. Thank you for a great conversation. Now, I've read the first 2 books that you've written. To an extent, it feels as if that you're trying to give a view of Pakistan to the Western world, although I'm not sure if that was the intended audience or not. Now, there are 2 parts of the question. First is that how were the books received in Pakistan? What were the reaction of the people? And secondly, have you thought about going the other way, of like writing about the Western world to the Pakistani audience? Of course, that might depend on your Urdu proficiency, though.
Well, I can't write a novel in Urdu. That's the first thing. When I was 3 years old, I came to America when I was 3, and my dad got into a PhD program here to study economics, and so we moved into a campus in California, as a matter of fact, and there were these identical townhouses where graduate students lived, and my mother one day comes out and she hears crying, and she sees that I'm standing at the door next to our house's door. And I'm surrounded by these children, and they said to her, is he retarded? And she said no. And they said, why can't he speak? And they said, yeah, he can speak, he's just not speaking in English. He doesn't know English. Anyway, so I came in, and for the next 1 month, my parents tell me I didn't speak a single word. And my mother thought, this is a pretty freakish behavior, we should take him to see a doctor. My father said, no, he'll be fine. And 1 month, she was right, obviously. And anyway, 1 month later, I began to speak, and I spoke in English in complete sentences. And we went back to Pakistan a few years later, and when I went back to Pakistan, my parents never considered this because I had been completely fluent in Urdu since birth till I was 3 years old. I had completely forgotten my Urdu. Then I relearned Urdu in the 4th grade and continued to study it throughout high school. But now my first language is Urdu has actually become my 3rd language, and English, which is my 2nd language, is my best language, and I've lost my 1st language. The only language in which I can adequately write a novel is English. So that's what I write in. Now, in terms of the reception that books get in Pakistan, obviously, like anywhere, receptions are mixed. Some people like books, and some people a particular book, and some don't. But it is fantastic in a way. Not that they all love my book, but it's fantastic the degree of engagement there is in Pakistan. We organized the first Lahore Literary Festival 3 weeks ago, and we had 25,000 people show up. And have I already just told this story on the stage? Did I tell you this?
You told me
Off
off
stage.
stage.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm repeating myself. It's like terrible. And we had 25,000 people show up for 2 days of readings. And I gave one talk, and the auditorium seated 850 people. They put another 300 people on the steps and sort of standing in the back, so about 1,200 people in the thing. They then locked the doors, creating a complete fire trap. And there were hundreds of people outside trying to get in. And this was not just for me. This was for my fellow Pakistani writers who were giving talks also. They had similar experiences. And they write in English, this group of writers I'm talking about. And what has happened is that in Pakistan, I think, I don't know if it's true, I kind of have the feeling, though, that young college students are reading novels in English much more than they are in Urdu. I don't know if this is true, but at least maybe, if not more, as much, but perhaps more. If I looked at the attendances of different events, it was quite interesting. And the question is, why is this happening? I think part of why it's happening is because we have an apartheid education system in Pakistan. If you go to a government school, you learn in Urdu, and if you go to a private school, you learn in English. But the best jobs require some English. The Constitution is in English. The Supreme Court deliberates in English. Foreign jobs require English. So people get to college, and they're Urdu speakers, and they're learning English. And so, I signed books for 4 hours after this thing. I must have signed a couple of thousand books. And I was talking to all these young people, and many of them didn't speak English that well, but when they spoke to me, and if I answered them in Urdu, they would keep speaking English until I stopped doing it, and I realized, actually, they're not trying to see if I speak Urdu. They're trying to say that we speak English, so please talk to us in English. So I should speak to them in English. Anyway, so they're learning English, and then they say, well, maybe we should read a book. And they've never read a novel before in any language. And so they think, oh, let's pick a Pakistani writer because it's similar context. And then in the course of this novel, they encounter themes, whether it be secularism or feminism or issues of sexuality, politics, whatever, that intrigue them because it's different from what they grew up with in their small town or whatever, and is provocative. They might agree or disagree. So I have to say, there was an Indian writer who came, Jeet Thayal, and he, after this, he came to this thing, he says, dude, we don't have anything like this. Like, these are young people who are standing up in an audience and saying, I moved to this city because I read your novel. Or this one guy came to me at the Karachi Literature Festival, and he gave me a little note. He must have been 19, 20 years old. And he said, the note said, I read it, he said, I want to meet you. He shook my hand, he left. I opened the note, and it said, there are 3 of us in a small village near Rahim Yar Khan, which is sort of remote, rural Pakistan. And we chipped in, 3 of us, to buy 1 bus ticket so that one of us could come to Karachi, 600 miles away, and tell you how much we liked Moth Smoke, your first book. And wait, hold on. If we stop there, it sounds like I'm making this sort of totally egomaniacal statement. Allow me to continue. And particularly, we liked the drug and sex scenes in Moth Smoke. And
They're good.
And implicit in this was, and you didn't really deliver in Reluctant Fundamentalist. We were hoping to find some, but it was kind of, And we want to say that we hope that you can, in your next novel, come back to what your fans are looking for. And this book wasn't out yet. And so the point I'm making is that this Pakistani reader is a human being just like everybody else. And there's 180 million people in Pakistan. They read for different reasons, and all stuff is going on. But I have to say that I feel incredibly connected to young Pakistani readers. This notion that you write in English, you write for some Western audience, for me is completely bogus. I probably make the bulk of my money outside of Pakistan in terms of where my books sell and how I make my living. But in terms of walking into a college campus and talking to 500 or 800 kids and having them read my stuff and interacting with them, it's there. And it's not some elite kids who are all like from rich backgrounds. That's the point I'm trying to make. So this distinction of writing in English as writing for the West, that's over. I think in Asia today, increasingly that is not the case. And probably Pakistan is the only country I can speak for, with some degree of knowledge. But I bet you all across Asia this is going on. I bet you there are kids in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in maybe Taiwan, I don't know, who are now reading in English for themselves. And Pakistan is peculiar because Urdu is not the language of most Pakistanis, even though it's a national language. But I feel very strongly that it is not true that the writing in English means you're writing for a non-Pakistani audience.
Another question?
I was one of the 25,000 people who heard you in Lahore.
Oh, right. No, I didn't hear me. They came to the festival, 25,000
Yes. No, I heard you also.
Oh, you heard
Yes.
me. Okay.
My question is about the publication of books in Pakistan. When I was in Islamabad, I arranged a meeting with Jamil Ahmed, and I thought I should buy his books. And I went to all the bookstores in Islamabad, and his book was not available. And he was, only last year his book came out to great acclaim. And it was very sad. Islamabad is the capital, and they said the book is published in India, and it just wasn't there. Same thing with Basti, Intezar Hussein's book in English was not available. The book in Urdu was also not available. I looked around. And your book was also not available at the literary festival. So
My book wasn't published yet at that time.
But in any case, there are no, would you comment on the state of publishing houses in Pakistan? Because I thought that is one area that things can be done more, because there are lots of writers now, and the books, because I live here, I've lived here for 25 years, and keep going back and forth, so I see that the books are being sold more here, and being published and publicized here more than in Pakistan.
Yeah. Well, the thing about it is that you're absolutely right. There's a problem in Pakistan. And, on the one hand, we have this sort of love-hate, but mostly hate relationship with India. And a lot of books published in our region are published in India, and the whim of any particular moment, either the import is allowed or not allowed, and so sometimes book gets stuck and they don't come in. Sometimes they do come in. So for my second novel, I published with Oxford University Press in Pakistan, which published a very, very cheap 200 rupee edition of Reluctant Fundamentalist, which became widely available. But Moth Smoke was published by a UK publisher and then pirated in Pakistan. The pirates made it widely.
I saw it when I was in Pakistan. There were entrepreneurs like the hero of How to Get Filthy Rich in Rising Asia. I was with one of Mohsin's cousins. He's like, check this out, man. We're at a market, and there's a big bin of photocopied versions of his first novel. I was like, no, that's ingenuity, right?
Yeah.
It's great.
That's an unmet market niche, But then the new novel is out with Penguin India, who are going to distribute in Pakistan. So I'm going to see how this works. But my understanding is it's actually working very well. They've got a whole bunch of copies. They've just arrived 2 or 3 days ago in Pakistan, and now they're for sale. But your point is there is a huge gap in the publishing industry in Pakistan. We need more publishers. We need more agents. We need more editors. We need more literary magazines. We need all of that stuff. It'll come. I was in talks to bring a big international publisher over to Pakistan. I had the CEO of this company. He was visiting, came to Lahore. We took him around for a couple of days and introduced him to the governor at the time, who was a fan of the arts and said, don't worry about security, we'll take care of you. And then he left, and 2 months later the governor was assassinated. And he said, that, look, I don't think this is safe. And I said, I can't blame you. But so I think the international willingness to open a publishing house in Pakistan was being explored, but I think that's gone. And we'll have to do it locally. But it will happen. I think it's bound to happen. It's going to happen soon. And I'm trying to get involved in doing that kind of stuff, or catalyze people to do that kind of stuff. The Lahore Literary Festival is like a step in that direction too. But you're right; it's a big problem, but it organically will, I think, now soon be addressed.
Another question over here.
Mohsin, you're so engaging on the page, but you're even more charming in person.
Oh,
You're so
thank you.
engaging.
The
Two-part
Pakistani
question.
James Bond.
Dave makes me look good. He's been doing it for
First-
25
I
years.
have that effect on people sitting next to me.
Yes, he sends that Dave aura, and we all look smart. And
First question, you said that, obviously, as an artist, you're writing it for your own self-help. So what was the self-help you got out of this? And the second part of the question is, being a writer-director myself, I find that sometimes having space from Pakistan, it's easier to sort of distance yourself and have a bird's-eye view. Now that you've moved in Pakistan, how is the cynicism and the apathy of a lot of people around there sort of affecting you? Because I find that a lot.
Yeah.
And is it that things are blurred around you? I mean, are you being able to, when you're living abroad, you're like, oh, wow, this is something very interesting to people, internationally, and when I'm at home, I take it for granted. Are you losing that viewpoint?
Well, to take the second question first, as you know, there's a lot of negativity in Pakistan. If you do anything publicly, you will get a lot of crap, for it, whatever you do. People are very opinionated, and they are very, ready to present you with their opinion. There's a lot of support also. I mean, just wonderful affection, and it's extreme on both ends. And the environment is, somewhat depressing. It is possible to feel, quite negative, and I often do, feel quite negative. But I tend to think that it takes an enormous amount of effort to keep Pakistan as screwed up as it is. The natural state of Pakistan is not to be this screwed up. That actually, that's what gives me hope, is I don't think Pakistan is trending towards, disaster. I think Pakistan actually is trending towards being a pretty decent place. But so many different forces, most of them internally generated in Pakistan, but also from outside, but mostly from inside. For me, Pakistan is like a balloon in a swimming pool, weighted down at the bottom of the pool, sort of bobbing 5 feet below the surface. And you look at that balloon and you think, this balloon is underwater, this sort of really sucks. But what is the natural state of that balloon? Is its natural state that it's just going to sit like that for the next 2 or 3 hours, 2 or 3 days, lose its air, and eventually just deflate and lie at the bottom of the pool? Or at some point, is that thread going to break, the thing's going to pop to the surface? It clearly is trending towards, it needs to, it wants to be there. And I keep seeing it that way, that it takes enormous political mismanagement and geostrategic idiocy, to keep Pakistan where it is. At some point, somebody's going to stop screwing up so badly, and it's going to improve, I feel. I try to think that way about it, and because there's just so much talent in Pakistan, ridiculous potential. You walk into a studio, you listen to the young kids playing music, and you will be blown away. You see what the contemporary artists are doing. It's fantastic. You see the kind of charity work that's happening in Pakistan, unbelievable. The sense of hospitality, spirituality, so much. It is a very, very amazing and vibrant place. And so against that is, some really bad geopolitical moves. So anyway, I guess in my writing, I do think about these sorts of things, and they do weigh me down a bit. But when you encounter negativity in Pakistan, for me, the one thing which I try to keep in mind is, look, we are all hurting in Pakistan. It kind of sucks to be in Pakistan. And most of us, most people in Pakistan don't have a choice about being there. That's where they are. And so it's natural in a way, in a place where there's that much anguish, that there's going to be some lashing out and some negativity. That's bound to happen. So I try not to take it personally when it comes my way. The other part of it, of course, is that, there's concerns about what can be expressed. How much are you free to say? Where does a boundary lie? What will get you into trouble? What will get you into serious trouble? What will get you dead? These questions nobody really knows, is the short answer to these questions. But what it does mean, if there is such sensitivity, it means that words have power. For people to not want things to be said so badly, it must mean that saying them is doing something. And in that sense, perversely, it's kind of encouraging as a writer to be operating in that environment where you're thinking it's not, at least it's not, nobody gives a damn. I mean, they might want to kill you, but luckily, hopefully,
but they care. But
yeah,
they care.
Yeah, exactly, they care. But yeah, so that's all going on. And so the last thing I would just say is on your self-help question, how did the self-help work? I don't know. You know, it's a very complex set of things that's going on. And you know, I'm a father now, and I have 2 young children. I have my parents getting older, and I wanted to explore, you know, life, the whole arc of it, because I'm seeing people starting and I'm seeing people reaching the end, people I love. And so that unsettles me, being in this position after 20, 25 years of living in the West and having a kind of mono-generational perspective. And so this book was a way to, you know, look at that.
I hope my question isn't too personal, but if it takes 6 years to write a book and then 6 years to write another book, and I'm assuming you're not a barista on the side, how do you support yourself between the books?
Well, I until recently, I've had a job. So, you know, I started writing novels around the same time Dave did. I mean, but a little bit, this may be a little bit after Dave. 1993, I began my first novel. And I didn't do it full time as, you know, without any other source of income until 3 or 4 years ago. So I spent 17 years writing books while working part-time in different jobs. So that's how I supported myself. Now I support myself on the income from my books and living in a relatively inexpensive place, which is Pakistan.
To answer the question of not writing in Urdu, I think hopefully somebody's going to pick it up and translate your book into Urdu and Pashto and Baluchi and whatever, Punjabi. It's a very well-written book. But my question is, I'm from Bangladesh, and recently I met this artist from Karachi, a young man, who's doing miniature painting in the Mughal style, but with the modern, today's Pakistan, and he's doing that painting. And you kind of remind me of him. But my question is, you're touching on themes that are much bigger than like your personal situation. You're looking at the world through the uber capitalism that your book alludes to. Now, my question is, in some ways, the Taliban is also reacting against the modern world and the misery that the people of Pakistan and the rest of the Muslim world and the third world is in. So, but they're taking a violent approach, where your approach is much more benign and literary. So how do you see the two opposites reconciling?
Well, I think, you know, I would agree that I think the Taliban are a kind of reaction against this sort of uber market force. Although, you know, at least in some sense, although we know that, you know, many Taliban groups are basically, you know, market operators that run protection rackets, kidnapping rackets, and other sorts of rackets. It's not that they're, you know, some post-money thing. Like any you know, any group of this type, you start off with a mission, right? And they start off, as you say, as a resistance force. But after a decade or 2 or 3, you just become a bunch of guys with guns, and then you become the mafia, or a mafia. And we've seen it happen in the, you know, the narco jungles of Latin America. We've seen it happen all over the world. You start off as a revolutionary, and soon you're kidnapping people and selling cocaine. And so, you know, so that has happened. In terms of this book in particular, my idea was to try to look at sort of a Sufi form and reappropriate that in a secular vocabulary. So you know, Sufi poetry, like mysticism from, you know, and Dave and I have had many conversations. I mean, in fact, when Dave and I were getting to know each other, part of the context was we were in a group of friends who were very interested in different religious traditions. And we used to have all these conversations about, you know, whether it's sort of, you know, Jewish mysticism or Christian mysticism or Zen Buddhism or Hinduism or Sufism or whatever. And the Sufi form, which of course is the most persuasive form which captivated the imagination of hundreds of millions of people in South Asia, is a worldview that suggests that through love, you can, through a love of the universe, at the universe, you can appreciate that the universe contains yourself, that you contain the universe, and you can decenter the self. Your self becomes less central. And so therefore, mortality and the eventual extinguishing of yourself is less traumatic. This is something which, of course, is common across many traditions. There are different ways of expressing it, but it's not a purely Sufi or Muslim thing. But I was interested in the Sufi form of it because it took the form of these epic love poems. That's the art form. And so I thought, how do you, and I think it's a powerful concept. I've seen it in practice. Since I moved back home with my parents, and my wife and I live upstairs, my parents live downstairs. My two children, a 3-year-old daughter and 10-month-old son, live with us. And I look at my parents, and my parents, for example, have become so excited about the future. The question is why? My mother's one of 9, my father's one of 4. They're getting older. Their friends are getting sick. People are entering a phase in life where the future should be frightening. Why are they excited about the future? Because somehow their love for these grandchildren has made the grandchildren's future exciting to them. They're going to learn to walk, talk, go to school, grow up, do all this fun stuff. And my parents have become more decentered from their own selves. And that is the phenomenon, I think, which is being talked about in the Sufi vocabulary and other such vocabularies. And there are many different ways. It doesn't have to be grandchildren. There's many other forms of love and empathy which enable this. So that was, in a way, what I wanted to explore in this. And because you figure that if it worked for 1,000 years to a certain extent to ward off this sense of anxiety and this pervasive mental illness that we find in our countries now, there must be something there. And it's something that one can explore even in a non-religious vocabulary. And so for me, that was, in a sense, what I was looking at. And that is something that I would say is maybe an indigenous cultural response to the Taliban, which is also an indigenous cultural response to this problem, but a response which I think is a dead end.
I think that's it for now. Thank you all for coming. Thanks, Mohsin.
Cheers. Thank you, Dave.
And there's books out there. So.